So you want to own a luxury hotel, marble lobbies, $900 rooms, guests who tip in hundreds, and never once look at the bill. Every night somebody checks in and says the same thing to their friends back home. I'm staying at a Marriott, except most of the time that's not quite true. Marriott doesn't own the building. Marriott doesn't own the land. In most cases, Marriott didn't even pay for a single brick. So if the world's biggest hotel company usually isn't the owner who actually put up the hundreds of millions of dollars and who's actually taking the risk. Buy the property, put the name on the door, watch the money roll in, except that's almost never how it goes, so you still want one. Let's find out what you're actually buying. Here's the gap that explains the entire industry. A room at a budget motel might cost $70 a night. A room at a Ritz-Carlton, $900. Both rooms have a bed, a bathroom, electricity, and Wi-Fi. That extra $830 isn't paying for the room. It's paying for the name above the door. The reservation system that found you, the loyalty points landing in your account, and the promise that everything inside will meet a standard somebody else set years ago in a manual you'll never see. Which means the real question isn't what a luxury hotel charges. It's who actually gets to keep that $830. Before any of that, here's what it costs just to build the thing. A budget hotel room can be built for well under $200,000. A genuine luxury room routinely costs $600,000 to $1.5 million once you include the imported marble, the custom furniture, and the brand-mandated finishes. Push into the ultra-luxury tier, and individual rooms can cost several $1 million each before a single guest checks in. At the extreme end, entire trophy properties become their own category of spending. Marina Bay Sands in Singapore is estimated to have cost roughly $5.5 billion. Once you count the casino, the convention center, and the rooftop that made it famous. Atlantis, the Royal, in Dubai, is estimated around $1.5 billion. The Burj Al Arab, often called the world's only 7-star hotel, is estimated to have cost around $1 billion once the artificial island beneath it is included. None of those numbers include a single year of actually running the place. Here's the part almost nobody outside the industry understands. If you build a hotel and put a major brand's name on it, you sign a franchise agreement. And that agreement is not free. Royalty fees, marketing fund contributions, and reservation system charges typically add up to somewhere between 8 and 15% of your gross room revenue, combined every single month for the next 15 to 20 years. Notice what that's calculated on: revenue, not profit. If your hotel has a terrible year, floods, a recession, a bad review cycle, the brand's fee doesn't shrink to match. It's a fixed percentage of whatever comes in the door. The brand gets paid on your top line. You get whatever's left, after paying for the building, the debt, the staff, and everything else on your bottom line. So, you still want one. Here's how the industry actually arranged itself to make that the norm. In 1993, Marriott did something that quietly reshaped the entire hotel business. It spun its real estate, the actual buildings, into a separate company, specifically to escape the debt and the downturn risk that had hurt it in the late 1980s. Freed of owning the bricks, Marriott grew from about 500 properties to something close to 7,000. IHG followed the same logic, selling off nearly 200 owned hotels between 2003 and 2015, pulling out close to $8 billion and returning more than $10 billion to its shareholders. Hilton's version happened in January of 2017. A corporate split into 3 separate public companies. One of them, a brand new hotel-owning REIT called Park Hotels and Resorts, absorbed 67 properties and more than 35,000 rooms straight out of Hilton's own balance sheet. By the end of the following year, Hilton itself directly owned just 71 hotels worldwide. It franchised nearly 5,000 more and managed almost 700 on top of that. One honest summary of the result: most of Hilton's earnings now come from collecting fees on properties it doesn't own at all. Here's what that actually means. If you're the one who bought the building, you carry the construction risk, the recession risk, the renovation risk, entirely alone. The company whose name is on your door carries almost none of it and still gets paid whether your specific hotel has a great year or a terrible one. The brand isn't really in the hotel business anymore. It's in the business of renting out its own reputation. And that raises an obvious question. If the brand doesn't own the building, who actually does? Almost never one single wealthy person writing a personal check. More often it's a hotel, read a real estate fund, a pension fund, a sovereign wealth fund from the Middle East or Asia, or a private equity firm. All of them buying the property as a long-term real estate play and simply renting the recognizable name on top of it. Even Bill Gates' investment vehicle, Cascade Investment, has for years held a major ownership stake in Four Seasons, alongside Saudi royal investors, precisely because owning a handful of trophy properties functions less like running a hospitality company and more like holding prime real estate that happens to also generate cash flow. For some of these owners, the annual operating profit almost isn't the point. A landmark hotel in Paris, London, or New York sits on some of the most expensive land on the planet, appreciating quietly for decades, largely independent of how any single year of occupancy went. The hotel operation covers its own costs. And then some. The real return shows up decades later when the land underneath it is worth multiples of what anyone paid, whether or not the rooms themselves were ever the most profitable part of the deal. And that reputation comes with a bill that arrives whether you want it or not. Every 5 to 15 years, depending on the brand and how the property is aging, you receive something called a property improvement plan, a mandated renovation scope, dictating everything from the carpet to the mattresses to the lobby furniture, timed on the brand's schedule, not yours. Brands typically phase this in stages: a lighter refresh around year 6, a much larger renovation around year 12, and sometimes a near-total rebuild by year 18. Typical cost, roughly 8% of your revenue, spread across a decade, though actual PIP costs have climbed more than 30% since before the pandemic, as of the last couple of years. Brands have also tightened the rules. Owners can no longer simply delay a mandated renovation indefinitely without risking the flag itself. And a PIP notice can arrive at the worst possible moment, right as you're trying to sell the property or refinance its debt, since a lender or buyer will simply price the coming renovation bill straight into whatever they're willing to offer you. And while the renovation happens, entire floors of rooms sit empty, earning nothing. At the exact same moment, you're spending millions to satisfy someone else's design standard. So, you still want one. Here's the fight happening on the booking page before a guest ever checks in. Online travel agencies, Booking.com, Expedia, and the rest typically charge a commission of 10 to 30% on any reservation made through their platform. That's why every hotel chain now pushes Book Direct as hard as it possibly can with app discounts, extra loyalty points, and better cancellation terms. Every booking that moves from an OTA back to the brand's own app is margin recovered, not created. The room was always going to sell. The only question is who takes a cut on the way there. There's a second, even stranger version of this arrangement, used by brands like Four Seasons and Ritz-Carlton on their flagship properties. Instead of just licensing its name, the brand runs the entire hotel directly, hiring every employee, setting every price, controlling every decision, while the owner never touches daily operations at all. In exchange, the owner pays a base management fee, typically 2 to 4% of total revenue, plus an incentive fee, often 5 to 10% of operating profit. Notice the asymmetry again. The base fee is guaranteed, calculated on revenue that arrives, whether the hotel is well run or not. The incentive fee is the only piece tied to actual performance, and it's a bonus on top of a fee. The manager was already collecting. The owner holds the mortgage and the real estate risk. The manager holds almost none of it and gets paid regardless of how the year actually goes. Some owners genuinely prefer this arrangement. Handing daily operations entirely to Four Seasons or Ritz-Carlton means never having to make a staffing decision, a pricing call, or a service standard. Yourself, what you're buying. In exchange for that fee is the ability to be a purely passive real estate investor in one of the most operationally complicated businesses on earth. For a pension fund or a sovereign wealth fund, that trade is often exactly what they want. And the brands have found a newer, quieter way to make money that has almost nothing to do with anyone actually staying the night. It's called branded residences. Four Seasons Residences, Ritz-Carlton Residences, St. Regis Residences. Wealthy buyers purchase a private apartment attached to the hotel, paying for the brand's name, its concierge, and its housekeeping without a single hotel guest ever passing through. For the brand, licensing and address is close to pure margin. No rooms to sell, no occupancy to chase, just the same fee logic as franchising. Applied to real estate, the brand never has to build, staff, or fill. So, you still want one. Here's the part where the room stops being the whole story. Prices in this business aren't fixed. They move by the day, sometimes by the hour, driven by software constantly reading demand. The same suite that rents for $450 on an ordinary Tuesday can jump past $1,500. The weekend a major concert or conference hits town with zero change to the room itself. No renovation, no new amenity. Just demand meeting a price algorithm that never sleeps. A luxury property with 65% occupancy at $450 a night earns more per available room than one running at 95% occupancy at $250. That single number, occupancy multiplied by rate, called RevPAR, is the reason luxury hotels almost never discount their way to full. And rooms are often the smaller part of the real story. A single luxury wedding, ballroom, catering, alcohol, flowers, security, guest rooms filled by the wedding party can generate several $100,000 in a single weekend. One large corporate conference can do the same in a few days, filling rooms, meeting space, and catering all at once, often booked a year or more in advance, which is exactly why sales teams chase this business as hard as they chase individual travelers. Some hotel restaurants, meanwhile, barely break even on their own. They exist to win awards and justify the room rate upstairs, not to turn a profit on the plate. In Las Vegas, Macau, and Singapore, the logic gets pushed even further. At a casino, resort rooms can be priced almost as a loss leader. The actual profit engine is the gaming floor, and sometimes the entertainment and retail wrapped around it. The hotel's real job in that model isn't to earn money on its own. It's to keep a paying customer inside the building for as long as possible. Here's the part that sounds like it can't possibly be true. The most expensive suite in the building, the one on the top floor with its own elevator, sometimes sits empty for most of the year on purpose. Selling it at a discount to fill it would signal, permanently, that the room isn't worth what the brand claims it's worth. Left empty photographed for magazines offered to visiting celebrities for the publicity alone, it does something room revenue can't. It justifies the price of every ordinary room below it. There's one more piece of this that has nothing to do with anyone sleeping in a room at all. Marriott Bonvoy Hilton Honors. World of Hyatt. These loyalty programs sell points in bulk to credit card companies and banks who hand them out as rewards to cardholders, who may never even stay at the hotel. It's a quiet, high-margin business sitting on top of the hotel business. And for some of these brands, it has become one of the most profitable divisions in the entire company. So, after all of that, you still want one. Here's what actually bankrupts these properties, and it's rarely the guests. A 200-room luxury hotel typically employs somewhere between 250 and 500 people. The ultra-luxury tier can run well past 1,000. Front desk, concierge, housekeeping, engineering, security, chefs, spa, therapists, valet revenue managers, accountants. A guest interacts with maybe 5 of them during an entire stay, while several hundred more keep the building running behind a door the guest never opens. Payroll, security, insurance, property tax, brand fees, and debt service. Don't pause just because occupancy drops. That's exactly what COVID proved brutally in a matter of weeks. Hotels running at 80% occupancy fell below 10% almost overnight. Revenue nearly vanished. The bills didn't. Many owners survived only because they had large cash reserves, or lenders willing to renegotiate not because the hotel itself did anything wrong. Luxury hotels are also unusually leveraged. Many are financed with 60 to 80% debt against the purchase price. On a $300 million property, a 2 or 3 percentage point rise in interest rates can add millions of dollars a year in financing costs alone, with zero change in how many guests walked through the door. Let's say your own hotel gets everything right. Prime location, strong brand affiliation, occupancy holding near 80%, a rate high enough to sit in the luxury tier, your gross operating profit margin lands in the 25 to 35% range. Luxury properties can achieve. Debt is manageable, financed at a reasonable rate locked in years ago. The renovations are funded years in advance through a reserve set aside specifically for this purpose. Not a scramble when the PIP notice arrives. Weddings and conferences fill your slower months, smoothing out the seasonal swings. That hurt properties with rooms as their only real product. That's a genuinely excellent business. A real estate asset appreciating in a prime location, throwing off strong cash flow on top of it. Here's the version that happens more often instead. Interest rates rise the same year. Your property improvement plan comes due. You're financing a multi-million-dollar renovation and a higher debt payment at the exact same time rooms are offline and not earning anything. A slower season or a soft economy trims your occupancy by 10 points. A wave of new competitors opens 2 blocks away, discounting hard enough that you either match them and erode your own brand positioning or hold your rate and watch some of your occupancy. Walk down the street, your brand fees, calculated on revenue, barely move, even as your actual profit gets squeezed from every direction at once. You didn't do anything wrong. You just discovered that in this business, the marble lobby was never the hard part. Surviving the years between renovations with fixed costs that don't care what the calendar says is, here's the truth this entire industry is quietly built on. The rooms were never the business. The brand licensing was, the franchise agreement was, the name on the building, and whoever actually collects a fee every time that name gets used was. A luxury hotel isn't a business that rents out rooms, it's a business that rents out a story about who you are while you sleep. And the company telling that story almost never owns the room, where you're hearing it. The building will need a new roof eventually. The marble will need replacing. The mortgage will get refinanced, more than once, at whatever rate the market happens to be offering that decade. The name on the door won't change nearly as often as any of that, and whoever owns that name is the one who was never really exposed to any of it in the first place.